Brazil's Supreme Court has begun to hear a petition for habeas corpus from the jailed former president Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva, which could result in his release from prison. The petition seeks the removal of the former judge and now Justice Minister Sergio Moro and demands that Lula's 9-year prison sentence be quashed. There was confusion about whether the hearing would go ahead after the Supreme Court postponed it on Monday. But the session is now underway. Ahead of the hearing, social movements across Brazil called for the campaign to free Lula to be stepped up. In the impoverished Northeast, many have heeded that call.
The Northeast is a region long forgotten by the centre of power in Brazil. The arrival of the Workers' Party government 16 years ago changed all that. And rates of growth, employment and literacy all increased, while infant mortality and poverty rates fell.
If it had been down to the Northeast, we wouldn't have this current president. We voted for a teacher who, instead of cutting spending on education, would certainly now be doing the opposite. In the Cut Union Federation, we've always argued that for countries to develop, they need to invest in education. It is on the basis of education that you can promote economic, social and political progress. Here in Brazil, we are now going backwards. We are losing the gains we made during the governments of Lula and Dilma.
The landless workers' movement in the Northeast has focused on the struggle for agrarian reform to turn its settlements into productive farms based on agroecology and on the fight to get rid of illiteracy, big land holdings and agribusiness. Now it's also fighting to free the former president, Lula da Silva.
The big challenge now for the landless movement in every corner of Brazil is to free Lula. But it is not only the MST that faces this challenge. With Lula in jail, the voice of all the Brazilian people is stifled. So this combined action between the countryside and the city can not only free Lula, but also push forward the struggle for land reform and against the pension reform and other neoliberal reforms that this Brazilian government is trying to impose.
In response to a national call, the social movements here in the Northeast are stepping up the Free Lula campaign. A campaign that saw this Tuesday as a key moment when the Supreme Court was due to rule on his petition for habeas corpus.
A commission of the lower house in Brazil is voting to ratify an agreement that would give the United States partial control of the Alcantara space base. The agreement was signed in March during President Jair Bolsonaro's visit to Washington. It gives U.S. personnel control over launch vehicles and related equipment and data, as well as over access to parts of the base which is close to the equator in the Brazilian Amazon region. Also in Brazil, a Supreme Court judge has suspended President Jair Bolsonaro's decree that would have put decisions on indigenous land claims in the hands of the Agriculture Ministry. Judge Luis Roberto Barroso decided to suspend the temporary decree President Bolsonaro issued last week. It would have removed decisions on the demarcation of indigenous lands from the National Indigenous Affairs Agency, FUNAI, and hand them over to the Ministry of Agriculture. The decree sparked protests by activists and Brazil's indigenous people. There is indignation in Honduras after the military police invaded the National University on Monday and shot 4 students. Classes have been suspended and more protests are taking place to demand the resignation of President Juan Orlando Hernandez. Our correspondent Eduardo Martinez has more from Tegucigalpa.
We are outside the National University, where classes have been suspended on all its campuses around the country. The students are today deciding on their next steps after the repression by the security forces on Monday, when the police and military spent 6 or 7 hours firing tear gas at the students. There was one incident which has caused a lot of indignation among both students and staff, where members of the military police broke into the campus itself and shot at the students. It has now been confirmed that 4 students were wounded in that incident, and the student body is now deciding how to respond. So let's take a look at the report we prepared on yesterday's events. Policemen and the army surround the National University in Tegucigalpa. It was after midday that the security forces began their siege against the university students. They have been protesting for 2 months against the privatization of education and the neoliberal policies of the Juan Orlando Hernández government. Indignation burst out when the military police attacked the students inside the campus with live ammunition, wounding 4 of them.
We have always had autonomy, and not even in the times of Alvarez Martinez in the 80s could the police enter the university. Now we see that the dictatorship of Juan Orlando Hernández burst in as if it were their property.
Meanwhile, teachers from the Campaign to Defend Public Education and Healthcare are pressing on with their protests to demand the government improve conditions in their workplaces.
I cannot support private education when I cannot afford those schools for my children. I cannot support private healthcare when I don't even have the 5 lampers you need to pay for a prescription.
It's our responsibility to watch over the country's sacred interests, and that's why people must reconsider their aims at every step, so that this corrupt government cannot stop our momentum.
They insist they will continue until their demands are heard by the government, whose own legitimacy is now in question. For his part, President Hernández said he sent in the military only to guarantee citizens' rights. Today, the students are joining the demonstration called by the Platform in Defense of Public Education and Healthcare. The University Council is also meeting to decide what to do about classes. Yesterday, the university authorities said that classes will continue and that the semester would not be suspended. However, after these latest events, the university authorities may decide they need to change that and take appropriate measures. Earlier today, President Juan Orlando Hernández defended his action in a television interview and insisted he would not give in to pressure. However, in the streets, we have heard renewed calls for him to step down immediately.
That was our correspondent Eduardo Martinez in Tegucigalpa. Palestinians in Gaza are staging a general strike against the U.S.-led conference in Bahrain on the economic aspects of an Israel-Palestine peace plan. A large banner declaring the strike has replaced the usually illuminated billboard over Gaza City's central street. Palestinian businesses and public services, including health centers and the Islamic University, have closed in protest at the Trump administration's conference. U.S. officials are unveiling the economic portion of its back-channel Middle East peace plan, the so-called deal of the century. The 2-day conference begins in the Bahraini capital, Manama, this Tuesday. Palestinian social movements and Syrian unions also rejected the U.S. plan by holding a protest at the Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria. They emphasized the unity of the Palestinian people in their opposition to the so-called deal of the century.
The Palestinian people are unified today with all of its forces, its activities, its authorities, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization to face the deal of the century with this unified position, with opposition in the West Bank and the territories occupied in '48, with the resistance against the occupation renewed, because it's the base to fight these plans.
Our correspondent Lara Tardo has more on that conference in Bahrain.
Since Monday, thousands of Palestinians, both in this region and around the world, have been protesting against this economic forum that has begun in Bahrain. The forum has been organized by the United States and is revealing the economic part of what Donald Trump is calling his deal of the century, his supposed peace plan for the Middle East. This morning, in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in other occupied territories, thousands took to the streets to reject this meeting and support Palestinian rights. In Gaza, public institutions and shops were closed from early morning, and there were big protests against the U.S. plan, which denies the right of Palestinians Palestinians to return to their homes and recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Here in Egypt, there is a large population of Palestinian refugees. Many have been here since 1948, when the State of Israel was created and more than 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes and their land. They say the only solution is to put an end to the Israeli occupation of their lands, which has lasted for more than 70 years, and which they say has caused a dire humanitarian situation for so many Palestinians.
Iran's president says the new U.S. sanctions against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei would have no practical impact because the cleric has no assets abroad. President Hassan Rouhani has also blamed the U.S. for abandoning the only route to resolving tensions. On Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing sanctions against the Supreme Leader and 8 senior officials.
We started the reduction of our obligations, and of course the Americans are very angry about this reduction in obligations. Why are they angry? Weren't they the ones that said the JCPOA is a bad deal? Well, we're also distancing ourselves from the JCPOA as well. So why are they unhappy about it? Is it bad for you but good for us? You can't say something and act differently. The JCPOA is either good or bad. If it's good, then why did you exit? And if it's bad, why are you so angry when we decide to get out of it?
Up next, Barbados is set to receive an IMF payment of $50 million. Don't go away. Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund has approved the disbursement of almost $50 million to Barbados. This follows the IMF's first review of Barbados' economic reform program under its extended fund facility. The fund's deputy managing director, Tao Zhang, said the island has made a strong start in implementing its ambitious and homegrown economic reform initiatives. As such, it will grant Barbados $48.7 million, bringing total disbursements to just over $97 million. Antigua and Barbuda is warning its citizens against the practice of acting as sponsors to allow for non-nationals to visit the country. The Department of Immigration said it noticed that sponsors forego responsibility after the person's arrival. The department urged non-nationals who have overstayed to visit its office to be regularized if they intend to remain in the country. Shifting gears now, cricketing legend Brian Lara has been hospitalized in Mumbai after suffering chest pains. The former West Indies captain had complained of feeling discomfort and was rushed to the Global Hospital in Parel. Lara, who holds world records for the highest individual innings in Test and first-class cricket, believes he may have overexerted himself while exercising. He says tests showed no serious problems and he's confident of being discharged soon. The 50-year-old batting legend was in India for media duties related to the Cricket World Cup. The government in Zimbabwe has abolished the multi-currency system. Finance Minister Mutuli Ncube has announced that international and regional currencies such as the Rand, US dollar, Botswana Pula and British pound will no longer be accepted in Zimbabwe as legal tender. From now on, only the Zimbabwe dollar will be accepted for all local transactions. He also said that the reintroduction of the local currency is part of transitional structural reforms aimed at restoring full monetary independence.
You know, the march towards full currency reform is part of our transitional stabilization program, which was a blueprint reform agenda. This move is really beginning to restore full monetary policy, and we give our central bank, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, flexibility in conducting monetary policy.
Staying in Zimbabwe, Most industries have reduced production due to long hours of power outages. Authorities have attributed the outages to the lower water levels at the Kariba Dam that generates electricity. The situation has also been worsened by $83 million of debt owed to foreign electricity suppliers by the utility company. China's foreign minister has strongly condemned accusations by outside forces that its cooperation with Africa is a debt trap. Wang Yi says his country does not pursue selfish geopolitical gains in Africa.
For some time, some outside forces have tried to vilify and undermine China cooperation by cooking up so-called neocolonialism and debt traps and so on, which are totally groundless and are not accepted by African people. Such attempts expose a total lack of respect for Africa, lack of understanding about China, and absence of knowledge about the true friendship between China and Africa that has stood the test of time.
In South Africa, the Moja Research Institute, in collaboration with Telesur and BRICS TV, hosted a roundtable discussion focusing on the impact of U.S. sanctions against Venezuela, Iran and Cuba. Telesur's special contributor, Joanne Abrahams, has the details.
The setting for the roundtable discussion was the historic Cape Castle, once a symbol of colonial oppression, but since the fall of apartheid, transformed into a place of remembrance and hope. Ambassadors from Venezuela, Iran and a representative of Cuba attended the gathering. They were supported by solidarity movements such as Friends of Cuba, the South African Communist Party and the Black First Land First movement. The discussion comes in the wake of the recent escalation of sanctions against several countries in the global south, causing severe social and economic instability.
The economic financial blockade and media war to our country it has had a very serious effect and consequences, preventing us from buying medicine, food, supplies, and other products and raw materials necessary for productions.
We announced that we never ever negotiated with US. Otherwise, we never starting a war. But in any case of invading, we seriously and ably will defeat ourselves.
The human damage caused by the blockades are incalculable. Human suffering is impossible to calculate. You can imagine that we cannot calculate how many people from Cuba, how many families suffering from the impediment that the United States applies to Cuba, for example, to buy any medicine that we need for treatment of cancer, for example, or to buy vaccines that only United States companies can produce. Those suffering we cannot calculate.
Participants from solidarity movements explored ways of minimizing the effects of these sanctions.
The only democracy that exists is that is defined by the United States and its allies. It's a Western, Eurocentric, democratic, whatever it is. And alongside it is a very notion of how they describe and or perceive the parameters for what is called human rights.
During a moving musical performance, the Afro Fiesta Band pledged their support to the people of Venezuela. 3 more roundtable discussions will take a deep dive into the effects of US sanctions on each of the 3 countries. Johan Abrams for Telesur in Cape Town.
Coming up, the fiancé of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi is demanding an investigation into his killing. Stay with us. Welcome back. The fiancé of the murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has made an urgent call for an international criminal probe into his killing, after a new report concluded Saudi Arabia is responsible. Hatis Genghis made the impassioned appeal at an event on the sidelines of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. A new report released by a UN extrajudicial executions investigator has found credible evidence linking Crown Prince Mohammed to the killing.
High-level authorities in Saudi Arabia therefore have a chance of being involved in this murder case, and further investigation is needed. An international investigation for murder must be opened. I had my concerns, but once I met Jamal, I became, in a very interesting way, a witness to a horrible murder, which is also a political murder.
But I want to suggest that the killing of Mr. Khashoggi is symbolic of many other killings, of many other patterns, of many other trends around the world for which the international community cannot turn a blind eye, cannot stay silent.
Anti-imperialist demonstrators in India have taken to the streets of Delhi to protest against the upcoming visit of United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Marching under a banner demanding an immediate end to imperialism, the protesters called for an end to the U.S. unilateral economic sanctions against India and expressed their solidarity with countries also suffering White House aggressions, including Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran. The Drums of San Juan festivity is celebrated on June 24th in various Venezuelan communities, and the Party of the People is on its way to being declared intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO.
In Naiguata, a coastal community on the central coast of Venezuela, hundreds of people dressed in red with scarves and drums to walk through the streets carrying a statue of the infant St. John the Baptist. The popular festival brings together Afro-descendants, Christian and pagan traditions. St. John is the only saint whose birthday is celebrated by the Catholic Church.
A culture of the people. We celebrate it every year and try to improve it every time. It's a tradition that began many years ago.
We celebrate the mix of African, Spanish, Venezuelan and Indian roots. A blend and union among all races, that is how we define the Drum of San Juan.
It's a colonial tradition that has its origins in the ancient cacao farms, when the black slaves had their only free day. The date coincides with the winter solstice, which serves for good luck rites and rituals.
It fills us with pride to dance and worship it. Wherever you ask of St. John, he will grant you.
I've been coming all my life, but since 3 years ago I've been playing the drums. It's even better. It's something you can't understand unless you go through it. You have to live it to understand what the St. John experience is.
Preparations begin for the celebration as early as January 23rd and are characterized by the joy that floods the procession with 6 types of drum rolls. The dance of the devoted and music that speaks about gratefulness, love and peace.
We, the Venezuelans, have to maintain our unity and together fight for peace in Venezuela. We have a very strong culture and religious power. Let's join together as Venezuelans.
In 2005, it was declared to be of cultural interest, and the Venezuelan government is supporting the process to declare it as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.